Hey guys, welcome to the Break into Tech podcast dedicated to those who want to transition into a tech career without a tech degree. So, joining us today, we have Haris, our general partner of Sigma School. Hello, Haris.
Hello.
Hey, Haris, how about you tell us more about yourself and what you do now in Sigma School?
So now what you have said, I'm the general partner of Sigma School, and I am leading the online coding bootcamp in Sigma School. And at the same time, I'm helping students to get, better jobs and to also upskill them as well.
Yeah, as we've spoken before, you did mention about your background in performing arts. Can you tell us what you did before coming into tech?
So it's not performing arts. Basically, I had a diploma in applied drama and psychology. So, just in one sentence, what is applied drama is basically a way for you to explore, social causes or social issues like bullying through drama, right? So, I
Hmm.
probably like create workshops. And then after that, I was also learning psychology. That's where, you learn the science behind human behaviors. And after that, I went to go to university part time and I was learning psychology. But I was also thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. And I wanted to see like whether the psychology industry was, something that is good for me. But at the same time, is it something that is in demand in terms of jobs? And after like researching and like really looking into it, I realized that, the industry isn't so in terms of like it's competitive, meaning that there were a lot of people who are learning, but there's very few jobs. So I was like kind of like thinking like, should I continue in psychology? And after that, I chanced upon an article where it showed me that this lady from, junior college after finishing A levels, she had multiple offers in, university. But the thing is that she didn't want to go to university, even though she is like someone who is capable of, performing well in academics. And she joined a coding bootcamp. So basically, like after she went through the coding bootcamp, right? After that, I was like, okay, she went through a coding bootcamp, but she got hired. She was an A level student graduate who got hired without any tech experience other than the coding bootcamp or even, any tech knowledge. So she was just fresh out of, junior college, finished A levels, only 3 months of coding experience, and she managed to get a software developer job. And then after that, I was like, looking into it, how much a software developer earns, right? And after I saw the six figures, I immediately quit my university, my part-time university, and join a coding bootcamp. So that's how I, transition from, learning psychology into tech.
Right, right. From what I understand, you came from psychology, and would you say you're very into human behavior or a people person in general?
I guess why I chose psychology is because that I was thinking to myself when I was, applying for a diploma, right? What are my strengths or what am I good at? And then I was thinking like what are the things that, people recognize my strengths are. And for me, when I look back then, right, was like good at listening to people's problem. I was like, okay, why not I just learn psychology? And that's like my decision. I don't think it's a good decision. I don't know if it's a good decision, but yeah, I mean that's how I chose, psychology. It's not necessarily that I'm interested. It's just like, oh, I like to listen to people problems. Okay, what what diploma does that? Okay, psychology. Okay, go join psychology. Yeah, that was the reason why I joined psychology.
Hmm. Yeah, you did come from a very people-centric kind of background where you wanted to be in psychology and you wanted to be someone who listens to others or tries to improve other people's life by being in touch with human behavior. Can you tell me what are some of the struggles coming into a coding job?
So I guess like going to a coding job itself, right? Because it was my first full-time job, I guess the struggle is not really from I was from like a people centric, environment. It's more towards like back then my struggle was that I didn't have a mentor during my first job. So I was like, there was once where I was the only software developer, and I was really struggling because I didn't have any like guidance in terms of like working as a software developer. But if you're saying that what was the struggles when I transitioned from psychology to tech, right? I guess it's like any kind of skill that you have to learn is like it's pretty technical, meaning that if you have no knowledge of, computers or how coding works, right? It's very tough, right? There's no like way around it. You have to learn how to think as a software developer. So like maybe my background back then in psychology was like maybe towards research, I guess, right? And going from research to logic is like, I would say maybe, I don't know. That's the thing. I really don't know if it's a struggle. But for me, when I was learning, of course, it was a struggle because I was learning something new. And back then, when I was in the coding bootcamp, I was like one of the few slowest ones inside the coding bootcamp. How I know I was the slowest one is that when people were to show their projects, I was the few people who couldn't run their projects without any like errors and whatnot. So what I did was like, okay, nobody is like gonna save me. I know that it is all in my effort. So I really like went through it and really like studied hard. And I managed to, became the first person to finish my exam or pass my, coding bootcamp exam. So that was a struggle. Like learning a new skill, I think it's very, especially when you have no coding knowledge, it's very hard. And then learning like how to think as a developer, I think if you don't have any like coding knowledge, is going to be very hard. And for most people, my classmates back then, they had no like coding knowledge at all. Maybe some of them had some coding experience, but most of them like struggled through the logic part of like how coding works and such. So yeah, I mean that was my struggle.
I see. Do you find a mentor, or how do you overcome this struggle? Do you get the right community, or do you surround yourself with the right person?
How I overcome the problem of not having a mentor was back then I find mentors, right? So luckily I managed, I mean, I tried to find mentors in two ways. Number one is back then I was the only software developer. I just told my like boss, right, or supervisor that I need a experienced senior to just, learn from. And he agreed. And then he managed to hire someone who's more senior. And that's where like my learning just became faster and better. So I know how to, run an application, learn different, services to help with my development work and whatnot. Then the second way that I did to find a mentor was to really just go through on LinkedIn and then just search on like, people that were doing what I was doing. So back then I was doing Flutter. So Flutter was like a mobile app framework. So a framework is basically a way for you to create something. So mobile app framework means you create a mobile application. And back then Flutter wasn't very popular. So that means that I had to really find it. And luckily I find one. And when I asked him, could you be my mentor? And he said, you can just go to GitHub. So for those who don't know what's GitHub, right? GitHub is basically a website that, people post their code, and that's where people actually create projects out of it. So he said that, okay, go to GitHub, and then after that, just contribute to the projects that's out there, and that is a good way for you to learn. And I was like, okay, thanks, but I didn't get what I wanted. But it's a stepping stone towards many things, right? And I guess the last mentor is kind of like fluffy, but saying that like I'm the only mentor that I need. Meaning that if I want to grow as a developer, I have to learn by myself. I have to grow by myself, right? So other than relying on mentors, which sometimes you might not have access to, I was like really learning from, Udemy, a website that has courses, or even YouTube. Just learn from people online and just try to understand what they're talking about. Learn as you go, because that's how you grow as a person. You need to really just have the motivation to just grow. And yeah, I think you are the best mentor to yourself. But of course, if you're able to find mentors, you can pay them. Sure, you can go to Fiverr and pay people to teach you. That I think that's also pretty good lah. right? But at the same time, like sometimes if you really cannot find a mentor that's very specific, especially when I was learning Flutter, which was still very, very new, it was very hard to find people who I'm able to get, like advice from. So yeah, I think you have to make do to what you have. So yeah, that's how I managed to resolve that problem that I had last time.
Right. It's more so towards being able to show and tell what you learn. You mentioned putting your work up in GitHub and being your own mentor is to show others that, hey, here are some of the initiatives that I've took and I've published my learnings in my portfolio here. Would you say so?
Yeah, I guess you can showcase your projects, but at the same time, like what's the objective, right? Of like showing, right? Maybe you want to show because you're proud of it, right? For me, I think it's more towards like continuous learning. Like sounds very fancy, but it is what it is, right? Like if you continue to learn, you get better, and as much as possible, hopefully you can, have better opportunities out there. All right. But I would say that definitely learning is a skill that and a habit that you have to train. It's not something that, you can just like, I am going to learn today and then tomorrow I don't learn or never learn, right? So showcasing your projects is okay, but just continuing to learn on your own, right? Of course, you can showcase and then like maybe people like it and then you might be recognized by it. But I guess like the intrinsic motivation, the motivation within is like more important.
Can you tell me about how did you get your first tech job in coding or programming?
So how I got my first like tech job was through a friend. So I was working in part-time in Gardens by the Bay, telling people not to touch plants. So, and the thing is that I meet people, whether they are graduates or whether they're like, people who are just waiting for their school to start. And I met one of my work colleagues back then, and she just graduated from university and she was, starting her job. And then after that, I was telling her about, I just graduated from coding bootcamp. And then she said, hey, why not join the company that I'm joining? So I was like, oh, okay, sure. So I managed to get like the email from her. And then I just, just what do you call this? Send an email, a cover letter. So cover letter is basically like writing a email of interest of like what for job that you're interested in. And then after that, they were keen on hiring interns back then. So okay, like for me, after the coding bootcamp, I don't really care about like finding a full-time job because I was still exploring, but I do want tech experience. So I was like, okay, since the opportunity is presented, I mean, beggars can't be choosers, right? Because I really had no like, tech experience. So I wasn't very skilled at it. So why not I just took the tech experience from an internship and then yeah, I went through interview with the founders of the company. They are called Tinker Academy, where they teach coding to schools. And I managed to, like showcase my projects that is not during my boot camp. So the founder, I think his name is Steve. Steve, he went to interview me and then he said to me that, hey, I need you to show a project outside of the coding bootcamp. So for those who are in coding bootcamps or in universities and schools, right? I believe that the projects outside your, education institution, whether it's a university or a polytechnic or a coding bootcamp, is going to be more impressive than what you actually do in school, because in school they tell you what to do, but outside of school, you tell yourself what you want to do, correct? So he asked me, you have any projects outside the bootcamp? And I said, I have. And I showcased a project that I was doing. And the project was called Kindness Confessions, where, you confess about, kind things that you've done or you have received. And that it wasn't really like a working product, but it was a product that I wanted to build. And then after that, I was able to answer questions or technical questions from the founder. And yeah, I think I was able to answer the question, and I got an offer from them, and I joined them. So that was how I got it. Basically, in essence, I got an opportunity from my friend. I was able to showcase a project outside of whatever I was doing in the coding bootcamp, and I was able to answer technical questions. So these are the three things that I believe helped me to get my first tech experience or tech job.
Speaking about technical questions, do you have any tips to share on people who want to ace a technical interview?
So I don't really have a lot of experience in like technical interview, but at the same time, like what you need to understand is that if you don't have the basics of coding, then I think that's something that you should understand and actually master. Second is that once you have mastered the basics, then learning the advanced concept actually is pretty, I would say it's easier than, memorizing the solutions to a technical interview. So for those who don't know what a technical interview for a software developer is, right? It really depends on the company. Sometimes they will give you algorithm challenges. So algorithms are basically coding challenges that they will give you and you have to answer in a matter of minutes, right? And then sometimes they'll give you like a live project for you to code or whatnot. So all of these are technical interviews, basically, whether you need to code or whether you need to answer questions about the code or just technical questions, right? So for those who are looking into being good at technical, interviews, I think the best way is to just master the basics first. And then second thing is that once you have mastered the basics, then you just need to practice, right? So there's this thing called data structure and algorithms. So this is where you have to learn how data is being stored in a computer. And then algorithms is basically just how we break down a problem into simple solutions that you can use, that you might use in your job, or basically to use to solve a problem, right? So data structure and algorithm, if you want to be good at it, there is this website called leetcode.com. So LEET code, CODE.com. And then there's also other websites. I'm a big fan of this website called CodeWars. So code, CODEWARS.com. So this is where you actually practice your coding challenges. But either way, I've also heard from, tech leads of big tech companies saying that, yes, you might be good at data structure and algorithms, right? Where you memorize the solutions and all that, right? But in the end, they're looking for people who can think, right? Because software developers not only code, they need to think of the problem, how they break down the problem into, solution, right? So technical interview, of course, you need to be good at the coding aspect, how to, solve the problem. But if you're able to think, if you're able to articulate the step-by-step of how this problem is broken down, that is actually more impressive, because what they're looking for is not people who can memorize. What they're looking for is people who can problem solve, because in any business, right, or employers or any company, you're going to solve very different problems. And if you are not able to practice that problem solving skill, it's going to be hard for you to actually become a software developer, because that is your job. You are supposed to solve problems, right? So solving problems is through, coding challenges, lead code. And then before that, really practice on your basics of coding, which are something that you really should master. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very hard for you. But either way, basics, lead code, and really, really understand how to solve the problem, not memorize it.
I actually want to ask, what are some of your plans with Sigma and your future in Sigma? And perhaps how do Sigma stands out from other camps?
Right, that's a very good question. So I believe that in Sigma School, other than, building real world projects, I believe that we are able to break down the concepts of coding as simple as possible. And there are students in our coding bootcamp where they have told me that when they were to do their coding exercises, right, and they compare the coding exercises outside of, Sigma School, they say that Sigma School is way easier to understand. It's so much easier to practice as well, because especially when you learn coding, which is such a hard technical skill, you need something that's easy to understand and easy to practice, because you get demotivated very fast, right? So yes, that, most coding bootcamps are able to help you learn a skill of a software developer and hopefully get you a job. The starting stages of learning is, I would say, the most critical. And I believe that we have made very good progress, and I think we are one of the best amongst of in terms of the learning experience, because when students tells me that it's easy for them to code inside Sigma School, I've done my job. Because if you understand about habits, when someone is able to repeat an action multiple times, it becomes a habit, and then it eventually become a skill that eventually, hopefully, you get better at it and become a master of it. So in Sigma School, we really dial down into the basics, I believe, for the online bootcamp, really dial down the basics of, coding, so that when you were to go to more advanced concept, which will definitely be around, then it is a much easier time for you to slowly grasp versus, some other courses out there where they just, breeze through or not even really focus on the basics because they think it's too easy for them. And for me, I don't see it, because your basics are the one that's either going to motivate you to become software developer or demotivate you, and you think to yourself, oh, I'm not a software developer because coding is too hard, right? Most of the time when people say coding is too hard, it's not because coding is too hard. It's because the people who teach you makes it look hard. So to make a good experience, find a good teacher, and I believe we actually have created a way for you to learn from us as easy as possible.
That's a fantastic explanation by Haris. I think this is me today. That was Haris Samigan, our general partner of Sigma School. And I'm your host, Ken Lui. Thank you for tuning in to Breaking into Tech podcast. Till next time.
Bye-bye.